Unlock doors.
I'm Celestia, and through this door, reality and the supernatural intertwine. Today's tale follows an artist who stumbles upon an enigmatic mirror, leading him into a gripping struggle with forces beyond his understanding. Join me as we uncover the dark secrets of the Mirror of Lost Souls. Theodore, a man with a talent for seeing beauty where others see nothing at all. One evening, he wandered into a forgotten corner of the city, into an old, shadowy antique shop, one of those places where time itself seems to have stopped. The dim light flickered off the shelves, casting long, dancing shadows. And there, tucked away behind dusty relics and half-forgotten memories, it called to him, a mirror, ancient and ornate, with a frame that seemed to ripple as if alive. Its surface did not merely reflect. No, it beckoned. Theodore felt it immediately, a silent pull, like a whisper carried on a breeze only he could hear. Why was he, of all people, drawn to it? Was it fate or something much darker? The mirror seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, its secrets just out of reach, waiting for him to unlock them. But as he reached out, something about the way the light flickered suggested that maybe the mirror wasn't waiting for him at all. Perhaps it had been watching. As Theodore's fingertips grazed the mirror's surface, something strange happened. The cool touch he expected was replaced by a faint warmth, subtle yet unmistakable, as though the mirror itself was breathing. Intrigued and unnerved, he took a step back, his eyes scanning the glass for his reflection. But there was nothing. No familiar face looked back at him, only a dark, shimmering void that seemed to swallow the light around it. Then, from within that void, something began to materialize. At first, it was a mere outline, a vague and indistinct form. But slowly, like a figure rising from the depths of a darkened lake, the shadow became clearer. Draped in mist and obscured by time, a figure stood in the place where his reflection should have been. Theodore's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary trick of the light. The figure was watching him. Its eyes, if one could even call them eyes, held a depth that unsettled him to his core. They glimmered faintly in the darkness, like dying embers, filled with a strange mix of desperation and something more sinister. It wasn't just a reflection trapped in the mirror. No, this was a presence, a being. Theodore could feel its energy pulsing through the room, subtle yet suffocating. He took another step back, but the connection between them remained. The figure seemed to study him, sizing him up, as though it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him. The air in the room grew heavier and thicker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His skin prickled with growing unease, and a chilling thought wormed its way into his mind. Was the figure truly trapped in the glass, or had it found a way to reach him? The longer Theodore stared, the more the figure seemed to move, though its body never shifted. It was an illusion, a trick of perception, but that made it no less terrifying. A creeping realization settled, and the figure wasn't simply a relic of the past, lost to time. It wanted something. It needed something. And now, Theodore was the one it had chosen. But why? What had he awoken in the mirror? The sense of dread in his chest deepened as he found himself unable to tear his eyes away. It was as if the mirror had locked onto his soul, drawing him in, closer and closer. He could almost hear it calling, a faint whisper at the edge of his mind, pulling him towards something far darker than he could have ever imagined. Theodore could no longer resist the pull of the mirror. What started as fleeting glances grew into an insatiable need, a hunger for whatever secrets lay hidden within its glass. Day after day, he found himself drawn to it, as if the mirror had woven an invisible thread around his soul, tugging at him softly, but relentlessly. His hands often hovered over its surface, eyes locked on the shadowy figure that watched him in return, as though the two were locked in a silent, unspoken conversation. He began to lose track of time. Hours slipped by unnoticed as he stared into the depths of the mirror, waiting, hoping to unravel the enigma it held. The figure never spoke, never moved, Yet Theodore felt certain there was meaning behind every flicker of light in the figure's gaze. He started to sketch it, his hands moving furiously, trying to capture the shadow's essence, hoping to make sense of its cryptic presence. But no matter how many drawings he completed, none seemed to be enough. There was always something he couldn't quite grasp, something the figure kept hidden just beyond his reach. As the days passed, his obsession deepened. Friends stopped by, concerned by his absence, but Theodore barely noticed. He'd sit by the mirror, muttering about the shadow, as though it had become his only companion. Their voices faded into the background, distant echoes compared to the intensity of the connection he felt with the mirror. Even when he wasn't in front of it, the figure haunted his thoughts. The world outside began to feel dull and irrelevant, a mere distraction from the mirror's magnetic pull. And with each passing day, the mirror's influence grew stronger. Theodore could feel it seeping into his mind, blurring the lines between his reality and the world beyond the glass. There were moments, brief, terrifying moments, where he questioned whether he was still in control, or if the mirror was the one controlling him. How could something so silent, so still, command such power? Late one night, when the world outside had fallen silent and the moon cast eerie shadows across the studio, Theodore found himself once again lost in the mirror's dark depths. The room had grown cold, unnaturally so, but he didn't notice, not at first. His eyes were fixed on the figure, as they always were, waiting for the slightest change. But then, without warning, a sudden gust of wind swept through the studio. The candles flickered violently, almost snuffing out, and papers scattered across the floor like dead leaves caught in a storm. Here was no window open, no explanation for the chill that seemed to coil around him. Theodore's skin prickled, and for the first time, unease crept into his obsession. In the mirror, the shadow moved. It wasn't the subtle shift of light he had seen before. This time, the figure inched closer, its form pressing against the glass as though testing the boundary between its world and his. Theodore's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, heart pounding, as a faint sound, a whisper, filled the room. The words were too soft to understand, but they carried a weight, an urgency that chilled him to the bone. Suddenly, the surface of the mirror began to change. Symbols, dark, twisting shapes, appeared on the glass, etching themselves with an otherworldly glow. Theodore's fingers trembled as he reached out, almost as if compelled to touch the marks, to decode their meaning. But just before his hand could meet the surface, the whisper grew louder, sharper, as if the figure itself was warning him. There was something more to this, something dangerous. A sharp gust blew through the room once more, snapping him out of his trance. Theodore stumbled backward, his heart racing. What had just happened? Had the figure tried to speak to him? Or was it trying to pull him further into its world? He stood frozen, staring at the mirror, realizing for the first time that whatever was on the other side wasn't just watching, it wanted out. Theodore's nights were no longer his own. Each time he closed his eyes, the shadow from the mirror followed him into his dreams, transforming his once peaceful sleep into an unsettling journey. In these dreams, the figure revealed fragments of a life long forgotten, a life marked by anguish, betrayal, and a deep, unresolved pain. He could see it now. The shadow wasn't just some mindless entity trapped in the mirror. It had lived, breathed, and suffered in a time far removed from his own. The dreams were vivid, pulling Theodore into another era, where the figure walked among the living. He saw glimpses of betrayal, trusted faces that turned to enemies, loved ones who had cast the shadow aside. There was always the same thread running through these visions, a haunting sense of injustice, unfinished business that had chained the soul to the mirror. Theodore would wake in a cold sweat, heart racing, the details of each dream seared into his mind. But the dreams didn't frighten him as much as they intrigued him. Slowly, he began to understand. This was no mere specter lurking in the glass. It was a soul, trapped in an eternal limbo, yearning to break free. The shadow's silent stares and cryptic symbols weren't just warnings. They were pleas for release, for freedom from the glass prison it had been bound to for centuries. But why Theodore? Why had the shadow chosen him, of all people, to reveal its tortured past? And what would happen if it managed to escape? The more Theodore tried to piece together the puzzle, the more the line between his reality and the mirror's world blurred. He couldn't shake the growing sense that the shadow's desires went far beyond escape. There was something else it wanted, something darker. Theodore's obsession had grown beyond the mirror's figure. He needed answers. Restless and consumed by the shadow's cryptic messages, he scoured every corner of his world, seeking clues about the mirror's origins. He spent endless nights in dusty libraries, poring over forgotten books and old manuscripts, determined to understand the dark object that had taken over his life. And soon, his search began to bear fruit. The mirror had a history, one steeped in mystery and tragedy. Theodore uncovered old accounts, fragmented stories passed down through generations. The deeper he dug, the more unsettling the patterns became. There were rumors of people, artists, scholars, and dreamers who had stumbled upon the mirror, much like Theodore, drawn in by its allure. At first, it appeared harmless, a beautiful relic of the past, but its true nature soon revealed itself. One by one, these individuals vanished, their lives abruptly cut short, their stories left unfinished. Each disappearance was eerily similar. Friends and family would recall how their loved ones became distant, obsessed, and consumed by something unseen. In every case, the last thing anyone remembered was that they had been seen staring into the same ancient mirror, lost in its depths. None of these vanished souls were ever found. There was never a trace, no sign of struggle, only the mirror left behind, waiting for its next victim. It became clear to Theodore that the mirror wasn't just cursed to trap souls, it hungered for them. The more he uncovered, the more Theodore's dread grew. This wasn't some random coincidence. The mirror had been waiting for another soul to claim, another story to leave unfinished. But Theodore had to wonder, was he next? Would the mirror take him as it had taken those before? As the days turned into a blur, something inside Theodore began to shift. The figure in the mirror, once a silent watcher, became frantic, its presence growing more aggressive with each passing moment. Theodore could feel it, its desperation seeping through the glass, reaching out, taking hold of him. The line between them was no longer clear. The more he stared into the mirror, the more the shadow seemed to embed itself into his mind, bending his will and manipulating his thoughts. The first signs of the figure's control were subtle. Theodore found himself doing things without fully realizing why. Small, uncharacteristic actions like moving objects around his studio or walking into rooms without knowing what he was looking for. But soon the influence deepened. His artwork, once vibrant and full of life, became darker and more disturbing. Unfinished canvases littered the studio, covered in chaotic strokes that mirrored the madness brewing inside him. His sleep, once plagued by unsettling dreams, now became a battleground. The figure haunted him constantly, whispering cryptic commands, showing him visions of the past, urging him to do its bidding. Each time Theodore woke, he felt less like himself, as if pieces of his identity were being chipped away, replaced by something far more sinister. He no longer knew where his thoughts ended and the figure's influence began. Then came the violent outbursts. He would catch himself in moments of fury, lashing out at those who tried to help him. Friends and family recoiled from him, unable to recognize the man he had once been. His hands trembled, his mind fractured. He could no longer trust his actions. The mirror had become his master, and Theodore its puppet. One evening, while staring into the shadow's eyes, he felt an overwhelming urge to destroy something, anything. His hand clenched around a nearby paintbrush, snapping it in two. His breath came in shallow gasps, the studio swirling around him in dizzying confusion. The figure in the mirror watched, its expression unreadable, yet Theodore knew. It was winning. The barrier between his world and the shadows was crumbling, and soon, he feared, there would be nothing left of him to fight back. Theodore's descent into darkness was no longer confined to his mind. The mirror's power, once subtle, now wrapped itself around him like a cloak, altering not just his thoughts, but his very being. His once bright eyes, full of life and creativity, grew dull, their spark slowly fading into the cold, hollow gaze of the shadow. His movements became unnerving, stiff, and calculated as if they were no longer his own but guided by something, or someone else. The physical transformation was gradual, yet undeniable. His face, once vibrant with youth, began to hollow, cheekbones sharp and skin pale, as though the very life was being drained from him. His hands, steady and precise from years of painting, now trembled with an unsettling energy. Every glance in the mirror showed a reflection that was no longer his. The shadow's presence had taken root in his body, reshaping him in its image. And Theodore, trapped in his skin, was powerless to stop it. Emotionally, the change was even more terrifying. The kindness that once defined him vanished, replaced by cold detachment. He became a shell of the man he had been, distant and unfeeling. Conversations with friends were now marked by eerie silences, his responses short, as if the words were being forced out against his will. His family, once the anchor that kept him grounded, now saw a stranger wearing Theodore's face. But the most chilling part of this transformation wasn't the physical decay or the emotional coldness. It was the sense of familiarity. Theodore could feel it, deep inside. The shadow wasn't just influencing him, it was becoming him. Piece by piece, the figure was merging with his soul, weaving its ancient essence into his very being. The longer he stared into the mirror, the more he recognized himself in the shadow's eyes. He no longer feared the reflection. What was there to fear when you could no longer tell where the man ended and the shadow began? As Theodore's grip on reality slipped further, he knew that his time was running out. The shadow's influence had woven itself too deeply into his soul, its presence more palpable than ever. Every breath, every heartbeat felt like it was no longer his own. But Theodore wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. In a moment of sheer desperation, he stood before the mirror, staring down his twisted reflection. The shadow's figure loomed larger, more distinct, its features almost human now, yet distorted by centuries of torment. It watched him with a sinister calm, knowing that victory was near. But Theodore had other plans. He grabbed a heavy object, a hammer, one that had sat unused in the corner of his studio, and gripped it tightly, feeling the cold steel in his trembling hands. With a roar fueled by fear and fury, Theodore swung the hammer toward the glass. The impact sent a thunderous crack through the room, but the mirror didn't shatter. Instead, the shadow recoiled in pain, the glass rippling as if alive, as if the figure itself were woven into the very fabric of the mirror. It fought back, its fury unleashed. A surge of dark energy erupted from the mirror, throwing Theodore across the room. He slammed into the wall, gasping for air, but his resolve only grew stronger. The shadow's face twisted with malevolence, its desperation evident as it clawed at the glass, trying to stop him. It no longer hid its true intent. It wanted Theodore's body, his life, his very existence. The reflection sneered at him, its eyes burning with a hunger that terrified him. But Theodore wasn't done. Rising to his feet, bruised but undeterred, he raised the hammer once more. "You will not take me," he whispered through clenched teeth, his voice trembling but resolute. He swung again, this time with all the strength he had left. The mirror shattered in a deafening explosion of glass and shadow, fragments flying through the air like shards of the past. The room filled with an eerie silence, the shadow's anguished scream echoing in the void. The glass lay scattered at Theodore's feet, the shadow gone. But as he stood there, panting and broken, he couldn't help but wonder, had he truly won? Or had the shadow left a part of itself behind, buried deep within him. With a final, desperate swing of his hammer, Theodore shattered the mirror, expecting relief and liberation from the shadow's clutches. The shards flew through the air, glinting ominously as they fell to the ground. The room fell silent, and for a fleeting moment, Theodore felt a profound calm wash over him. The shadow was gone, its anguished screams silenced. But the peace was short-lived. As the dust settled, Theodore found himself not in the safety of his studio, but in an unfamiliar, unsettling realm, a dark, twisted reflection of his world. The environment was oppressive, filled with distorted echoes of his reality. The walls were lined with endless mirrors, each showing distorted versions of himself, shadows of who he once was. The world around him seemed to pulse with dark energy, as if the very fabric of this place was woven from his fears and regrets. His reflection, fractured and eerie, stared back at him from the shards of the broken mirror scattered on the floor. It was a haunting image, his face, but twisted, eyes wide with terror, trapped in a permanent state of despair. The reflection seemed to be pleading, yet there was a cruel twist to its expression. Theodore reached out, desperate to understand, only to feel the glass slice through his fingers, as if the shards were alive, holding him captive. Then, from the depths of this shadowy prison, a chilling message echoed through the broken pieces, resonating with an icy clarity. Some reflections are meant to stay lost forever. The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the space with a foreboding weight. Theodore's heart sank as he realized the cruel truth. By shattering the mirror, he hadn't freed himself, but had sealed his fate. The shadow had not been vanquished. It had merely found a new vessel. As he turned to face his new reality, the gravity of his situation settled in. The shadow's world had become his own, a dark reflection from which there was no escape. Theodore's fate was sealed, his soul forever entwined with the shadows, imprisoned in a realm of eternal darkness. So, did you enjoy the twisted journey of Theodore and his unfortunate encounter with the mirror? Did you catch the irony in his attempt to escape only to find himself trapped in a shadowy dimension? Sometimes, our efforts to outrun our fears only lead us deeper into them. Enjoyed this glimpse into the unknown? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more. See you at another door.